how can we make a whole crew of miniatures in as little time as possible? Let's find out. For the past few months now, I have been slowly building up my collection of custom miniatures for my game Spire Seas, but man has it been slow. So far, I've made about 3 miniatures in as many months, but my game calls for at least 5 minis per crew, 2 crews. That said, I have been learning a lot, and I think that I've found a way to really speed up this process by making a whole batch of miniatures at roughly the same time. The key is to make a single character with as many interchangeable parts as possible, allowing you to make a whole slew of technically unique characters. This is perfect for representing those low-level deckhand crew member characters that are common throughout the Spire Seas. Now, to do this, I knew that I was going to need to make some custom concept art, rather than relying solely on AI like my last mini. Dolly 2, the AI art generator, did come in handy for making some quick reference, which I think is probably the best use of this technology for miniatures, but that's a topic for another time. As you can see, I styled this character mainly off of that classic pirate look, with a vest, bunched up pants, and a sort of sash belt. But Spire Seas is set in a post-apocalyptic future, so I added a little bit more of that sci-fi aesthetic, with some armor plates and helmet and mask. The helmet and mask are especially important for this project because covering up the head and face with a few different variations really helps sell the idea that these are all different individuals. That and having a selection of post-apocalyptic weapons. In Spire Seas, crew members have access to a variety of one-handed or two-handed weapons, and I wanted to make sure that those were represented on these miniatures, especially the scav hook, my favorite. Then, with the design taken care of, I jumped over to Blender. I started off with one of the base models that I made a few videos ago, then got to work with a rough version of the clothing. Starting off with the pants, then the shirt and shoes, and finally the vest and belt. Or belts. I also added a little bit of hair and a beard just to avoid making yet another balditude. Quick tip, you can use the multi-resolution modifier in Blender to sculpt in higher detail at this point, but still go down to a lower resolution when you're posing later on. Then I got to work on the armor, starting with the arm guards. These will be used for both armored and unarmored versions, because I think they look cool, and so I wanted to get those done first. Finally, I added a little belt pouch and some more detail. And then the base layer was done, at least for the moment. Next, I got to work on the main armor panels, and these went much quicker. One of the benefits of the sci-fi aesthetic that I've chosen for Diluvian Chronicles is that those hard-edged panels are much easier and quicker to model. This helmet looks particularly sci-fi and might seem a little weird. I quite like it, but let me know what you think down in the comments, if I should go more towards a post-apocalyptic looking aesthetic or stick to what I've got going. With this design, I can also separate out the faceplate and use it by itself, allowing me even more variation. And with the basics done, it was time to work on some weapons. First, the spire hook, then the crossbow, the great hook, the shield, and finally, the javelin. These are super easy to put together just by extruding out some faces and moving around a few vertices, and then you can smooth it all out and add detail later. The only thing to be careful about here is not to make your weapons too thin or small, as once printed, they can get very fragile. With the weapons done, I went through another round of detailing, and man is it easy to get caught up in this process. But I had to constantly remind myself that at 28mm scale, most of it just wasn't going to show up. But, on the other hand, adding just a little bit of texture and roughness to your models can really get some nice results, especially if done well. My recommendation, if you're making your own, is to just play around with the clay strips brush in sculpt mode, and focus on those larger features, things like folds or seams, that will help when painting to separate out different parts. Once I was happy with the results, I could move on to rigging and posing. It was a bit more challenging to rig the weapons this time, since I knew that I would be using multiple weapon types on the same model, and this meant that there would be a little bit of variation between where the model was holding each one. So I took a little more time and added an extra bone to the rig that was specifically for the weapon. This lets the weapon move independently from the hand and gives me a lot more control. And once that was done, I could really start to play around and make some poses. This is probably my favorite part of the process, but it is certainly more art than science. It can take a whole lot of finagling and shoving things around to get your model in the right position. For my first model, I went with this charging pose with the hook and shield. Before I could print it out, I went through and combined all the parts together into a single unified object. But, and this is key for this project, while doing so, I made sure to make some alternate save files at different stages, so that I could make a file with different armor loadouts. Using this system, I could vary the number and location of armor panels, change out the style of the helmet and masks, and even change the weapons. This is much faster than making a whole new miniature, but it can still be a time-consuming process, especially if there are any errors or wonkiness in your geometry. So it's a good idea to go through and double-check each object before putting them together. Not that that's what I did, just that it would be a good idea. Once everything was together, it was a pretty straightforward process to export it as an STL, add supports in Lychee, and print it out on my resin printer. For this first one, I decided to print a few different variations with different orientations and support structures, just to see if there would be any problems and fix them before I moved on to another piece. They turned out mostly okay, but there were a few spots that I knew I needed to add more supports to, so I made sure to fix those for future models. Then, to add variation, I decided to give each weapon its own pose. I went back through this process for each weapon type, this time choosing slightly new loadouts or locations for the armor. Each weapon also got two whole different variations, one fully armored and one without armor. And in the end, I was left with 8 technically unique new miniatures. Let's take a look. And there we are. I now have enough of my own unique miniatures to fill up 2 full scavenger crews for my game Spire Seas. All of them are up on myminifactory.com right now, so you can get your own set as well. Plus, now that I have the files all set up, it will be relatively easy to add new poses, weapons, or variations. Let me know down in the comments or on Instagram or Twitter if you have any suggestions for what to add next, especially what the offhand weapon should be for the javelin and scaff hook. Once I have another set ready, I'll put those up online as well, so keep an eye out for more variations. And now that I have my crew all sorted, all I need is a captain and some new ships. So stick around here on the channel if you'd like to see me make those. But that's all for today. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and maybe even learned something in the process. See you next time.